Which areas have been identified as election areas of concern? That big question and more with Police Lieutenant General Ferdinand Divina, the PNP's Deputy Chief for Operations and Head of Task Force for the 2022 elections. Good evening, Lieutenant General Divina, and welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening po, and good evening to all the viewers po.
Sir, as the COMELEC said, this is still being verified, this is still being vetted. Nonetheless, can you identify which areas are being identified as election areas of concern?
I can only share in the meantime the total number, and based on the recommendations of the PNP after a careful deliberation and application of the risk factors, we have recommended to the COMELEC 105 towns and 15 cities nationwide to be considered as election areas of concerns. We are doing away with the term hotspots.
Okay.
We rather refer to it as election areas of concern for purposes of priority focus deployment by the Philippine National Police.
Okay. What are the factors? So what goes into considering an area as an area of concern?
The factors, nasabi na po kanina, the state of intense political rivalries, alam naman po natin, it's only 32 days, around 30, to be exact, 32 days before the May 9 elections. And pag-approaching na po yan, the rivalries, especially in hotly contested areas, becomes intense. Second po, the presence of private armed groups or potential private armed groups. Yung potential private armed groups, ito po yung validated criminal gangs na dahil wala nang magawa. In the meantime, it's more lucrative to engage in private armed armed groups or being hired for purposes of employment as private armed groups. The others are the presence of other armed groups such as the communist terrorist groups or other local terrorist groups, and we are referring to the armed men in some parts of Mindanao. Ito po yung what we refer to as risk factors po.
Okay, well, General Divina, you mentioned that two things there in terms of armed groups. Criminal gangs, pagkatapos yung isa po, yung mga armed groups associated with communist movements and so on. What about private armies?
We refer to them as validated private armed groups. Of course, pag naubos na namin po ito, those listed as criminal gangs can be transformed as potential thugs based on the promise of reward or money being given for purposes of employment as private armed groups. But we are closely monitoring this, both covertly and overtly.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Lieutenant General Ferdinand Divina.